We want to welcome you to the August 9th edition of the Durham Community Safety Wellness Task Force monthly meeting. We're glad that you are here. We're glad that all of our task force members are here, as well as our wonderful support staff, Rose Worth. Thank you all for all your work. This is one of those culminated meetings where we really have a lot to look at, a lot to think about. We have quite a few recommendations to consider. The quicker we get this done, the quicker we can send this word out to all of our community that there are solutions for the problems that we're experiencing. There are solutions to harm. There are solutions if we all come together and tackle them as one. So thankful, grateful for this point in our work. Without any further ado, I'll pass it over to our co-chair, Marcia Owen.
Thanks, Xavier. Yes, well, and in that, the value I'd like to offer to y'all tonight is the value of collaboration. When you say community, you nailed it. What has been so striking and such a gift through this time together we've spent together is how many community members have been involved, how many hundreds and hundreds of people we've reached out and listened to, and I'm just so grateful for community. So is that a value that collaboration, a kind of meld of collaboration and community, can that be the values that we hold during this time together tonight? Great, thank you. And to you, Rose.
Yeah, so I put together at the request of our co-chairs a timeline for our kind of remaining time together, which is going to very quickly slip by, for better and for worse. So I sent this all out via email, but I just want to put it up on the screen right now. This is the timeline that we're going to have to stick really closely to, just because things are going to move really fast from here on out. So I think that most roundtables are working on their sections of the final report. Talked with a lot of people about the idea of pop-out features too. So that is included in this August 31st deadline. If you have any sort of pop-out feature that you want to include in the final report, if you're tasked with any sort of writing, introduction, roundtable sections, etc., we want to have all of that on the Google Drive or to me by August 31st, so I can work on stitching it together with a few other people who volunteer for that task. If you did, I'll reach out sometime in the next couple of weeks so we can kind of get prepared for that. Our penultimate task force meeting is September 13th. So that's going to be the deadline for putting recommendations before the task force. If you have any that have been kind of cooking on the back burner, that's the hard stop deadline, because we have gotten a request from at least the city to send a table of recommendations. So we're not going to have the final report done by then, but so that they can consider it in some of their meetings that are upcoming in the fall, we are going to send them a table of all of the recommendations on September 15th. And then we'll have that kind of September 13th to September 20th to incorporate any of those final recommendations into the final report. I think it's about a week and a half review period that I'm hoping we can kind of stick to, where we should have the entire stitched together version of the final report to everyone on the task force to read and add any edits. And then on October 11th, we will have our final task force meeting and vote to approve the final report for the task force. And then we've also been talking about having a final public meeting where residents of Durham and leaders of organizations, the press, elected officials, anyone who's interested can come for you all to share the final report recommendations and perhaps talk about some sort of steps forward in safety and well-being in Durham that everyday community members and community leaders can take. And we want to try and get that on the calendar. I also included a Google form link to that. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and put that in the chat. So just take a second and fill that out, and kind of I'll choose the date when the most possible people can attend. Hopefully we can get almost everybody there. So any questions about that timeline, concerns, fears of meeting any of those? I know I said it's tight, but if we do have worries, we should collectively discuss that. All right, as we approach August 31st and throughout September, you'll probably get a decent amount of emails from me. I'll try and keep them to a minimum as much as possible, but probably like little prods and reminders just to keep us on track. Anything else you want to add to that, Xavier or Marcia?
Thank you.
All right, I think from there, then we go into our second reading. So should we start with the bail bond recommendation? I think just to keep us moving, try and do like 10 to 15 minutes per recommendation. So so we can also give enough time to our first reading recommendation that we'll have later in the meeting.
Mike, you may-
Sure, I can just, I'll just tell you guys what changes we've made to the bail bond recommendation since the last time you saw it. The main thing was to add information that Marcia got from the DA's office. That's mostly in the kind of the rationale part, some more information about their bail bond policy and how it does support moving away from secured bonds and lower bail, but there are still some loopholes in it. So our later recommendations about encouraging the DA's office and others even more to move away from bail and bonds is still relevant because there are caveats to the DA's policy. We added under the recommendation part, kind of highlighting that people with mental health issues and with substance use disorders there should be a kind of, we just made it a general point that those should be prioritized for diversion, instead of getting high secured bonds and bail, those, in particular, we should be moving away from having people like that get stuck in the jail and as opposed to where they should be. Jesse had a good suggestion, a good observation on the last version that I sent you. So we've not yet been able to incorporate it, Jesse, but we will. Namely, we make reference in the rationale part about how, part of the theory behind bail and bonds is this is what you need, a bail or a bond to encourage people to show up for their court hearing. Whereas plenty of research suggests it doesn't really have much of an effect on that. There are other things that affect someone's ability to show up for court, not knowing about it, transportation, intervening issues, et cetera. So Jesse's good point was, well, if that's the case, then perhaps you should add a recommendation about what the community should do to increase support to make sure people can get to court. And so we discussed that today, found out a little more from our colleagues at the Justice Services Department about the one service that used to be in place in the county, a grant-funded project to give people text or voicemail reminders, hey, you've got a court date coming up. That's unfortunately doesn't exist anymore because the grant ran out. So we will be adding to the final version that'll be part of the final report that you guys will see, a recommendation about reinstituting an improved version of that kind of text or voicemail reminder, with the ideal really being, to Muffin's suggestion, it really should be kind of an 800 automated number that the state would do, because it shouldn't just be Durham. You should, wherever you are in North Carolina, you should be able to call up and find out, when's my court date, where is it? Because there are people who have, court charges and court dates in more than one county. Of course, we're not going to get real specific. We're going to say that would be the ideal. It's up to the administrative office of the courts and people to figure out how to make that work. But in short of that, we will include some other things that could be necessary Durham-based supports to help people make sure they show up for court. Again, we'll lay a few of those out. We won't get into a lot of detail about the implementation details, because really that'll be up to, assuming the county commissioners even like the idea, or the administrative office of the courts, or the DA, whoever. It'll be up to them to figure out how to implement that. I think those are the main changes to it since the last time you saw it.
Well, and also Isaac made a great point to clarify, which we did with.
Oh, yes, thank you.
That it is in fact the Superior Court judge and the senior Superior Court judge and the chief district court have signed. They do the bond schedule, the bond schedule. So
Right, I think we
we've
had made a
got that.
reference, yeah, we made a reference.
Thank
to the- Yeah, to the senior Superior Court judge is the one who supervises the magistrates, and we had a proposal in there about more oversight and accountability and uniformity in how magistrates approach the bail bond decision and how they document it. So that's why we made reference to this. The senior Superior Court judge should direct magistrates to follow basically the law they're already supposed to be following and document their bond decisions. But we also then clarified later that yes, in the explanation of how things work and who would be responsible for implementing changes, it's both senior Superior Court judge and chief district court judge. That's it. Any other questions or anything?
If no other questions, I'll be happy to call the roll and take the vote. All ready? Okay, we'll start with Isaac.
Yes.
Thank you. Jennifer,
Yes.
thank you. Jesse,
Yes.
thank you. Manju,
Yes.
thank you. Marsha,
Yes.
thank you. Mike,
Yes.
thank you. Muffin,
Yes.
thank you. Sammy,
Yes.
thank you. Wanda,
Yes.
thank you. I vote yes as well. Passes unanimously. Wonderful, wonderful work. Rose, who we have up next?
Next, we have the Youth and Schools Roundtable proposals. So I'll leave it up to y'all whether you want to talk about the SRO or the youth wellness first.
I was following the order, so I have the wellness and restorative practices proposal up first to share. Let me switch this though. I got two screens. I want to see y'all while I talk. Okay, sharing my screen. Do. So I'm holding space, just doing a quick check-in. Alejandra isn't here. Nori isn't here. Samuel, you're here. And of course, Marsha and Xavier are here. And Alec isn't here. So several of our roundtable members aren't here to speak, but I'm going to do my best to speak on our behalf. But I welcome Xavier, Marsha, and Samuel in particular to chime in, but really anyone, of course. This has changed a lot over the course of several months, but since we last met, I'll highlight a couple of features that feel important. We were able to meet with members of the Student Support Services Department. We originally met with Dr. Bullock, who leads the Office of Equity Affairs. He made it really clear that it felt kind of impossible to move forward with any set of next steps if we weren't including the Student Support Services Department. And so thankfully, we were able to meet with Dr. Maddox Perry and Dr. Judd Manning, and we could incorporate their feedback, which is highlighted in this middle section here. I think the main things that I can name for y'all is that they felt like there was a lot of alignment with things that are already happening. And I think it sort of highlights for me two things that we heard in our listening sessions. One, how important it was to have more adults on school grounds and engaged with young people, which is part of why we framed it as adult serving youth in the title of this proposal. And again, just wanting to be really intentional about the implications of hiring. As I move forward, you'll see one particular part of this proposal is a recommendation for staff, and just keeping in mind that if there are certain features of the job description that are already handled by someone else, where there are potential shifts that can be made. Of course, thinking about the funds to actually cover the cost of a set of employees. So these are things that we want to remain in conversation and just offer our best guidance based on what we've heard from community members. In particular, just to keep scrolling down to highlight, we really wanted to make sure we were incorporating feedback from Durham Public School stakeholders. We were able to consult with Amber Crispo, Brianna Tuscani. We heard back from Principal Logan at Hillside as well. So it really feels like we were able to connect the expertise of these consultants who are working in Durham Public Schools with the feedback that we were hearing in our listening sessions, months ago, around partnering and collaborating with folks in the surrounding community. Again, having more adults on site, thinking about the ways that we could increase wellness and restorative resources, and making sure they're being implemented correctly. I want to also name just some of the references we made as it relates to other recommendations from other bodies. We were able to include 2 that were outside of North Carolina, one from Texas and one from California. In addition to the DPS strategic plan, the governor's task force report, the racial equity task force report, and the youth listening project report, which were already included. But for those that felt it important to not limit ourselves to only looking at what's happening in Durham, really wanted to do a good job of exploring what other models exist or what other points of reference feel connected to this work. And so we were able to incorporate those additional resources. I think the last thing that I'll mention, and I made reference to this earlier, was the naming of a particular hiring decision around a director of restorative practices. Currently, there are restorative practices coordinators. And so a director would oversee that coordination and really be able to offer some senior administrative level support within DPS. And so that felt like another way to continue the work that's already happening and make sure that it's being done with efficacy and fidelity. Along with that additional position was the recommendation around partnership, particularly with the Office of Equity Affairs office. That's redundant. The Office of Equity Affairs, as they manage a lot of the professional learning and development for the adult staff in DPS. And then finally, again, bearing in mind that this isn't just about DPS stakeholders, but really about youth broadly and adults serving youth broadly in Durham, and holding thoughtful, creative space for the implementations of wellness and restorative practices that can happen outside of the school context. And ideally, those would be in formation together so that what's happening in school is connected to what's happening outside of school. And that's already the case, but how can we be intentional about that? And so that one generative experience feeds into another. And we're really able to maximize the assets that we have, both within DPS and outside of it. I'll just highlight again, the Office on Youth has been a great thought partner. Laura Khalil, the director, has helped us think about some of the different practices they have in place for partnering with youth and other youth organizations. So the Durham Youth Leadership Fund feels like a really solid model where they have this process of being able to work with youth to select the projects that are of greatest relevance. And those projects often have youth in executive function and adult serving youth in executive function to really make sure that we are centering the folks that are closest to the pain and closest to the impact around the issues that matter. So again, they feel like they have been a great resource and someone that we've consulted with regularly throughout this process. And you see Laura's name mentioned here. There's nothing else that I'm thinking about highlighting in this moment. Oh, one last consultation that we had was with Kristen Hopkins Vincent, the CEO of Dangers of the Mind Education Fund and Black SEL. Her work to really center social emotional learning in a context that's culturally affirming felt in alignment with our wellness practice as well, making sure that young people have the skill set and the resources to really feel affirmed in who they are, and I'll say protected in environments where they can actually talk about what they're experiencing, and really kind of have that step-by-step process, those different competencies. Again, that can be culturally rooted, culturally responsive, and culturally affirming. So she was very helpful in offering language around that and offering just opportunities where the work that she's doing could align as another kind of off-campus implementation. So just wanted to name that. Any questions, comments?
Just in awe of the array of organizations and experts and practitioners you all talked with to develop this.
Yes, Mike. Thank you, Manju.
Yeah, I would second that, Jesse. And I think this latest version gets more specific on what you mean by restorative justice. And you make reference to the and having a hired person to kind of oversee and coordinate the implementation of it, I think has the potential to keep it focused, since you guys made the point for the outset that a problem is the school might say they're using restorative justice, but really it's traditional discipline with another name. And I think this avoids that problem. I was curious, do you see any potential connection between this proposal and your proposals about the SRO MOU and the role of SROs? And in meaning, presumably the point of this approach to restorative justice is as a better form of dealing with issues at a school than traditional discipline, and in particular in having SROs get involved and then those youth get involved in the criminal justice system. So could you think, committing to restorative justice in the schools mean a lesser role or a different role for SROs? Or would they not be part of this process?
I definitely think there's potential overlap. I think the heart of this proposal is really wanting to focus on like the dynamic way in which restorative justice as a concept and idea matters, and how it's not just about responding to incidents where harm takes place, but at the core, it's about how we build relationship. And so one of the things that I'll highlight, if you'll give me a moment, many things happening. I'm going to share my
Because I think,
screen.
yeah, you've made that point all along, that this really is an overarching kind of philosophical directive or approach for how the district should approach this issue. It's not just about one particular element of discipline. I could just see a school board member potentially reviewing this and saying, how does this relate to your other proposals that are more focused on the SROs?
So
This
part of
seems
what
like-
I'm wanting to name here, and Marcia, you might appreciate this. If you see where it says proposals goals, the first is really about this comment of proactive community building circles. I feel like that's something that I heard from other task force members comment about how we needed to focus on building and sustaining relationships. And then if we didn't name that with greater clarity, and if we focus solely on these kind of incidents or issues where harm happens And those are the incidents and issues where usually SROs are activated in particular. We kind of get ahead of ourselves. And so I think, again, I'm highlighting that in this moment to just name that I do think that there are potential points of connection to the other recommendation around the SRO MOU and around sheriffs and schools more broadly. Again, I think we really just try to do a good job of keeping the conversation open for as binary as the conversation about SROs can be. Are you for, are you against? Really wanted to create spaces where people can think about safety and wellness with youth, safety and wellness in schools in a more expansive way. And so hopefully one of the key takeaways of this proposal is the importance of creating and sustaining quality relationships with our young people and with the adults serving them. And it's in that context, with wellness practices in place and restorative practices in place that are done with fidelity, it's far easier than to respond to an issue where, you know, there's a fight or there's a weapon or there's some kind of incident where someone is being suspended. How do we actually get to a point where we can bring the impacted parties in circle and address what's happening? So if that includes an SRO, wonderful. And there are so many other instances where every member of the community can engage and participate in this kind of restorative way. So I would just reiterate and highlight that as the focal point or one of the focal points of this particular proposal. I hope that answers your question well as it relates to the SRO alignment.
Totally. And I think, you know, you've now, I've helped you write the first part of the draft of your a roundtable report, because if you set up an introduction that's how these things flow, it'll make sense to the reader, this package of proposals. And this one is sort of the principal primary overarching one. And then the ones more related to SROs flow from that. But this one is the broader, and then the other ones flow from that. It'll help a reader go from one to the next.
I'm with you, Mike. I was just thinking as Jesse was speaking, that what he just said, that his answer to your question totally summarizes what it's been like to be on that committee. Which start off as the SRO, kind of split into SRO and youth, then recombined as the SRO/youth committee. That journey was so succinctly captured in your response, Jesse. Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Be happy to call the roll and do a vote on this one. Okay. I'll start at Barbara's time. I will say yes. Wanda?
Did you say Wanda?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
I'm going from the bottom of the chart this time. Shanice? Shanice? I'll come back. Samuel?
Yes.
Muffin?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Marsha?
Yes.
Manju?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Isaac?
Yes.
Shanice? Okay. Thank you all for those votes. It does pass unanimously, with one abstaining at this point, it looks like. And we will move on to our next one. Jesse is back in your court.
There we go. Trying to get everything in order. So this, I think, will be even quicker. The main change that was made with this proposal was just to incorporate more accessibly the listening session data. So the recommendations themselves are the same, and they're threefold: to lift up people over policy, human wellness over law enforcement, to leverage the mental health and restorative justice assets in our community, and to formalize partnerships with the Durham Community Safety Department where possible. And in my estimation, as I've stewarded this process and really heard from a lot of different audiences, with this particular proposal, this is something that's connected to our bylaws that was named as something that we should look at, the SRO MOU in particular. And given how central law enforcement, of course, is in that topic, we really thought it made sense to think about the Durham Community Safety Department, the work that they're doing with HEART, and name that, as well as has been mentioned, this emphasis around wellness, around mental health, and around restorative justice, and the assets that we can activate in our community to contribute. The data-driven observations, again, feel bolstered even more now that we've incorporated this analysis report of listening session data. Shout out to Rose and our other research assistants that really helped us create this. Originally, when we finished our listening sessions, we had all the data, but it wasn't organized, it wasn't cleaned up. And so they did a great job of making the data clean and actionable and then providing us this summary. And again, I think the data-driven observations that we have, I think, make a lot more sense when combined with this analysis, so that folks can more easily read exactly how we got to those observations and from where they come. And so for context, again, we had 16 listening sessions where with DPS stakeholders, including youth, specifically high schoolers, their parents and caregivers, educators, teachers, including what we call professional helpers, your counselors and therapists, and then principals. And we listened to all of them. And so the themes that we heard are outlined here at the top of this section. And then there's more sort of feedback specific to those things that then I think inform the observations that we wanted to pull out that connect with those key recommendations. And so our hope is that this feedback taken together is helpful for our decision makers, particularly the superintendent, the sheriff, as they think about what does it actually look like to come to an agreement, and who are the other community members, particularly within DPS, but also outside of DPS, that can be a part of creating safety and wellness in Durham Public Schools. And so again, we feel really confident about the track record that we've seen with the Community Safety Department, given the crisis response pilot that has now been expanded. We imagine that this could be one additional way that continued expansion and development can start to look like, seeing signature unarmed person-centered teams that focus directly on serving young people in schools and the staff and administration there. So again, I think similarly with the other proposal, this is less about saying, give us this amount of money, but it's really about creating a vision with clarity and precision so that decision makers and stakeholders can do their due diligence to figure out how do we actually make something like this real and concrete. So a lot of it is similar feedback around restorative practice, around mental health, around caring adults in school buildings. So I present that to you all again. Any questions, comments for the group? I see Manju's hand, and then Dr. Wanda, I saw you come off mute. So Manju.
I'll yield to Beauty.
Dr. Wanda, can you respond if you, since we're yielding to Beauty?
Good gracious. No, I just wanted to say that I'm thrilled with the work that you've done. And I look forward to the change in culture in Durham Public Schools.
Manju.
Oh my gosh, I really affirm that. Echo that. I had 4 specific friendly amendments to make. Want to appreciate the inclusion of the voices from all of the interviews and listening that y'all included. And would love if, like, in the digital version of the final thing, that we're able to, like, just all of our roundtables share as much of our data as we're able to, like, make available to the public without compromising the identities of people who participated. And that could be like just the digital version, so it doesn't make the print version really long. My 4 friendly amendments are, I would like to propose that we add something to the effect of, we call for transparency regarding all school resource officer interactions, sheriff's office interactions, and Durham Police Department interactions with Durham Public Schools students and staff, and the related demographic data. And maybe it's a separate edition, but discussions regarding the question of school resource officers in schools moving ahead must center the voices of Black, Latine, Indigenous, and people of color youth, especially low-income youth and youth with disabilities, who are disproportionately impacted by criminalization, punishment, and policing within schools. And this feels in alignment with the upcoming conversation that the school board is going to be having tomorrow regarding the, I think it's called the Black and Hispanic Student Success Plan. Inside of there, I think there are questions around getting more transparency around this sort of data. So it would dovetail well with a request that's emerging from within school board. And I think we could garner the support for it. I would like to propose that we remove the 2 lines of recommendation language that I feel are unnecessarily affirming of the need for SROs in public schools, which feels kind of out of place with the 3 primary goals of the recommendation at the top, and also just feels out of alignment with that portion of our bylaws around our recommendations, specifically enhancing safety and wellness as alternatives to policing in the criminal legal system. And I can be more specific about what those lines are in a minute. I'd like to propose that we replace the word criminal with criminalized, in acknowledgement of the ways that, like, a Black and a white youth might do the exact same activity in a school. And we see consistently that Black and brown youth are disproportionately targeted for activities that we see white students receive support or counseling around instead. So that's why I would say criminal rather than criminalized rather than criminal. And the last thing is just very connected to our work on the crisis response roundtable. I'd like to propose giving HEART a chance to work directly in Durham Public Schools at the request of school leadership without the recommendation of co-response with SROs. So there's like a little phrase about working with SROs. And we just haven't seen data that's affirming the usefulness of co-response in compassionate crisis care. And it has come with a host of challenges within the city processes during the pilot, which we can share more about if anyone's curious about what that's looked like. It's not to say that with SROs existing in public schools that they couldn't reach out to Heart if they needed to, but just that we making that recommendation kind of builds in the idea of co-response where I'd rather that we not. So those are my friendly amendments and affirming the whole spirit of the proposal. Oh, would it be useful for me to show the places that I'm specifically referring to, or?
That
that-
would, for me, I imagine it may be helpful for others since you've offered some of this feedback and I'm hearing you tracking generally, but to be more kind of like effective in plain terms, like specific to the line, that would be helpful.
Rose, do you mind empowering me as a screen sharer?
Yeah, I agree with Jesse. You made a reference to two places where it specifically affirms us, and I didn't see where that was. So if you can point that out, that would help.
Sure. Here we are. This was me just tracking as I was reading. I wondered about just saying nurturing a culture of care centered on people, because I think we can be encouraging lawful behavior and be nurturing a culture of care. I think here we could say we have many local assets that could partner with DPS staff. Like the goal here is figuring out how to support DPS staff so that they feel robustly supported. And I feel like that more effectively addresses reducing stigma around mental health, normalizing restorative trauma-informed wellness practices. I think, yeah, just encouraging deeper exploration of the Durham Community Safety Department's capacity to respond to criminalized safety concerns when and wherever possible. The more that we're able to see skilled mental health clinicians, peer support specialists, and EMTs responding to those criminalized safety concerns, the less likely we're going to see someone get harmed by an armed, trained law enforcement officer in the ways that we've seen happen across North Carolina more times than we can count, particularly to kids of color, especially Black youth. I wonder if we could just remove this line about keeping SROs that demonstrate a clear history of positive engagement among staff, students, and parents, caregivers. Like, we know that Durham Public, I feel like that's already addressed when we say we encourage Durham Public Schools administrators to take concerns about SROs seriously and ask them to implement the protocol proactively with dignity. And it's addressed in the next sentence where it says, based on our listening sessions, we recognize the complex opinion. I think y'all heard that complex opinion really loud and clear in the listening sessions. I don't think we should censor the diversity of perspectives that were shared in listening sessions. And there's a pattern that people who are closest to the pain regarding law enforcement have a negative experience and would like to see less interaction with law enforcement, right? We see that throughout all of the listening sessions that we've conducted in all of our spaces. And I particularly wanted to remove this part about not wanting to make things harder by removing a functional, beloved community asset. Like, we really also heard in listening sessions that not everyone feels it is a functional form, a beloved form. There are parents who feel afraid to send their kids to Durham Public Schools or to any schools because of this danger of something happening to their child as a result of an interaction with law enforcement. And then the thing about criminal versus criminalized, I think that was the last note. Oh, and then just CC Spalding with a U. That was the last thing. Oh, yeah, and then similarly, this thing about while integrating SROs can increase safety, I would just add, can increase the perception of safety. Like, we know that true safety is gained when we are offering people the kind of like resources they need to thrive in communities and be in stronger relationships with each other. Like, I feel clear that a true affordable housing intervention that ends evictions in Durham would do far more to create safety in our schools than increasing the number of SROs. Like, those are the kinds of solutions that I'm hoping we are recognizing. And I know that the school board is already thinking about some of those things. Like, I know that city council and county commissioners are also asking those questions too, like how do we make Durham Public Schools safer by changing our living conditions? I don't think it's about increasing SROs. And I think a sentence like, while integrating SROs can increase safety, means more funding for SROs, which means less funding for the nurses and school counselors and other critical life-saving roles that we've seen stripped from our schools since I was a young person growing up in North Carolina public schools. Yeah, and then this last sentence is again on that same tip about asking that we shift away from the stuff about relationships and trust and really just talk about like the kind of policies that could go into the SRO MOU that would prevent further harm or risk of harm. Thanks for listening. I felt like I took up a lot of space there and I appreciate y'all's patience.
I'm holding space before responding, just checking in with you, Muffin. I saw your hand.
Thank you, Jesse. I heard everything that that you said, Justin. I heard everything that you said, Manju, and I was wondering, because I didn't come to any of the listening sessions, so I don't even want to begin to speak on who said what. But the folks who did say that they felt safer if there were SROs in the schools, or they have a relationship with the SROs that isn't based off of fear. Is there a way to put the things in that you suggested, Manju, without removing what other folks who let their voices be heard? Because if you take it completely out, then the voices who said that, it's like they're being silenced too, just because we don't agree with how they feel and we haven't had those same experiences. You know, I don't want us to take, you know, take their stuff out.
No, absolutely not. So just really want to affirm quoting participant perspectives that express that diversity, where like underlining that there is complex tension around this question by sharing what participants said. The only places where I am recommending edits are in our recommendations as a task force, and having those recommendations be about mitigating harm, reducing the likelihood of interaction between a young person and law enforcement, and increasing funding, support, affirmation of the life-giving resources that we hear schools, staff, and students and administrators say they need to increase safety and wellness.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Maybe that's where it was getting kind of gray for me, but okay.
Go for it, Doc.
Yeah, so I was going to say that many of the listening sessions that we've held February on into today mostly happened after the high school student at Hillside was murdered, and after the state of urgency was shown. Okay, so the perspective of the young people that we interviewed was from that perspective. And so they did share an extreme concern about safety and wanting SROs in schools. And I understand the concern about SROs who behave the way that they are trained and trauma-informed to behave in those that do not. But I think one of the things that we don't think about often are staff and teachers that are working from a traumatized perspective, and they're hurting, and therefore there's some help that they need as well. So I wouldn't put it so much on, and maybe you're not saying this, so much on the SROs being a problem. I mean, I think that, individuals that are traumatized and working with other individuals hurt people. And so we need to be concerned, in my opinion, about the health and wellness of everybody, which the previous proposal did speak to, and perhaps getting the SROs in sync with those kinds of things that we're talking about in terms of staff and adults. I think that there may be less concern about the numbers of SROs, because in today's climate, we need people who are available to address some things that may happen. Just my opinion. Thanks.
Mike, I'll defer to you, and then Rose, I'd love a time check just to make sure we're tracking well.
Well, Rose, give him the time check first, because I will, Jesse needs a chance to respond since he was the principal writer of this, but so how much time we got?
Yes, I think, let's say max 10 more minutes on this.
So Jesse, you go ahead, and time remaining, I'll
No, you're
can
good.
respond. Sure. Okay.
I'd like to listen.
I would just briefly say that I totally get Manju's instinct, and I think the careful writing and rewriting again that you and others did strove for that attempt of balance. And I think just, strategically, politically, since a lot of eyes are going to be on this particular proposal, since it is focused on SROs, if you excised any reference to even potential utility of SROs or their potential role in partnership with DPS, that would just get raised eyebrows and it's the thing that, frankly, Sheriff Burkhead, for instance, might focus upon and cloud out the other aspects of it. I think a way to achieve what Manju is after, and I think the overall spirit of this proposal connected with the others and in your introduction is going to get at the point that Wanda just raised, that the whole point of your package of proposals is to have genuine wellness and safety in the schools based in restorative justice and whatnot and healing that negates the need for SROs to intervene as much, and perhaps if they're there to be in partnership and in alignment with. I think you achieve that in the language, in my opinion, in the language that you approach, where I think Manju's first friendly amendment about calling for more transparency and at the school level and at the district level of SROs documenting what they do and why they do and how they do, and especially having more accountability at a school level by students included, student leaders and teachers with their individual SROs could get at that kind of accountability measure. It's not just between the sheriff to discipline his SROs and the superintendent to agree to the memorandum of understanding. But since one of the things that the MOU says is that SROs are supposed to meet regularly with their school constituents and talk about what it is they're doing, not just give lectures on law enforcement, but to be, in a sense, accountable. And I think you could mention that existing part of the MOU and say that could be strengthened to do a structured system of accountability and transparency at the school level where there are SROs. That could get at what Manju's getting at. And I guess an overarching general question I had of this is the point of this recommendation that, based on your reading of the MOU, you have these recommendations related to school safety, or is it that the sheriff's office and the school board should take this recommendation and use it as a guide to revising the MOU, if that makes sense? I get why you don't get into the weeds and say, well, in paragraph 3, page 6 of the MOU, it says this, and the wording should be changed to that. You're not getting into that, but how do you intend this recommendation to be connected to the existing MOU and any future one that would be written?
So each data-driven observation starts with language in the current MOU.
Right. So maybe just if you can say that would be useful, that they should use that as a guide for revising the current one. Maybe that's so obvious it doesn't need to be stated.
Admittedly, I'm not sure in this moment. Transparently, I've done my best to be very open to feedback from every task force member. And this is the first time I'm hearing some of this feedback from Manju in particular. And I want to honor the importance of what she's lifting up. And my sense is that the way that I tend to work as someone who is an artist when it comes to words, and I'm mindful of a dear friend of mine who says words create worlds. And I want to honor my own process of listening and being able to hear Manju and hear everyone's feedback as it relates to this particular proposal, and incorporate some of the feedback that we're hearing in a way that does not silence any of the feedback that we've heard. I really appreciate what Muffin is saying. And I think that's the spirit. I think, Muffin, you mentioned this, and Dr. Wanda to a certain extent. There is a complex tension, and figuring out how to hold space for decision makers who not only believe, but experience SROs in a way that is not harmful. I don't know how to affirm that experience. At least up until this point, I've done my best to honor and affirm the reality of that experience. And especially when we think about the way in which public schools at large is just not being supported the way that we want to see it supported, where, again, we heard time and time again, we need more caring adults in the building. So it feels very challenging to me to not make space for the folks that want to have an SRO that they see as a caring adult in the space. And I think what we try to do and what we're trying to do is name the venues, the channels that are available when it's clear that there is a lack of transparency, when it's clear that there is harm, when it's clear that there is an abuse of power. And yeah, in this moment is that we could put it to a vote and see what happens. We could also wait and give ourselves a little bit more time to get the language right. I really appreciate that we've been able to have unanimous votes. And I don't think that they're just superficial. I think it's reflective of our desire to really be in restorative process with one another and be in circle. And that happens both publicly and privately. So I'm curious to hear from others if you'd like to move forward with the vote, or Xavier and Marsha, I defer to your leadership. I think in this moment, I'm sort of feeling like I could work on this some more and have more conversations offline to be able to present another reading. I'm just noting in the chat, Manju, you said, I think we can affirm that some participants in listening sessions, particularly some administrators, educators, and parents, can be truthfully fulfilled without us making any recommendations that can later be used to make a case for increased SRO presence in our public schools. Yeah. I want to get this right in a way that honors the truth of what we've heard, the values that we are upholding, and the assignment that we have. So yeah, I'm just checking in at this point.
Thank you, Jesse. My question to you would have been, had you, before you said what you just said, do you feel that it would improve or enhance what we have here to defer this to our September meeting, since we are listening to a different second. We do have space for second readings or third readings in this case in September. If that work is something that you feel is important, we can just defer. I do want to point out that, and it may not be clear, that the recommendations are at the top, and the observations that make up the bulk of that document could be seen as recommendations from us. I think the intent was to accurately reflect what we heard from the community. And that's been mentioned by Mike and others, but I could, moving forward, the vote now will be a vote on the recommendation as it stands. If you want to go back and revisit some language, Jesse, just let us know. We can just defer. And I'm sorry we don't have more roundtable members here to weigh in.
I would just like to know how much wordsmithing in terms of what we've just discussed, Manju, do you think would be needed in order for the views that you put forth this evening to make you feel comfortable? I mean, would it be all of them? Would it be some of them? Would it be wordsmithing? I mean, and so is there a comfort level that you would have where Jesse would need to go back and rewrite and review this yet a third time? Yeah, that's my question.
You're asking how many of the ideas I named I would need? Oh, I don't know if I have like a answer to that question, but
Right.
yeah, I mean, for me, it feels salient here that our task force came together in a moment where I saw the most tremendous uprising of Durham youth I've seen in all my years in North Carolina. And it was around, well, maybe since the fight to stop the rate increase on Durham buses, but like when I was a teenager. But in my adult years, I had never seen anything like the marches that Durham Public Schools students organized to get SROs out of Durham Public Schools. These were Black and brown youth organizing gigantic marches, like really just substantial. Isak was one of the marshals. And we were following high schoolers and middle schoolers who were just really clear with their stories, with their experiences, like this has to end. And they came to school board and they like followed the processes, and school board wasn't ready at that time. These were the voices of young people closest to the pain, trying to say, like, we need an intervention here. And it also feels like, I mean, just to name another kind of moment in time that is speaking through me, is like just talking to Durham elders who grew up in Durham Public Schools about, like, SROs are a very new addition to Durham Public Schools. Durham Public Schools have existed for a long time addressing issues of poverty and inequity and challenge and discipline struggles, disability, like a slew of concerns with nonviolent solutions, unarmed solutions. And we know it's possible. Like, yeah, so it's in that spirit that I'm offering these edits, and it is not with a hope that we in any way obscure or hide
Yeah.
the perspectives of people who said, actually, I feel safer in the schools because SROs are there. Like, let's name that as quotes from those folks and make sure that our recommendations are in the spirit of the recommendations at the top.
Yeah. And I think for my process, as much as like, I think what feels unclear to me, thank you, Manju, what feels unclear to me as a point of process is like, if we vote on this proposal as it is, and we like, I think in my mind, I have an understanding that once we vote and approve a proposal, changes shouldn't continue to be made. And so that's sort of where I feel like, and it's one thing to be like, oh, this is a misspelled word, Spalding, good catch. And something that like, I think potentially even has the perception of silencing voice in the community. And I think, and as a part of my process to really look at the data and make sure we are being faithful and not allowing our own biases to like cloud a process unfairly. I think that's a part of why I'm feeling paused and wanting to have some more space to like do the stewardship of words that I mentioned earlier in a way that has fidelity. And Manju, if you can send me not only the revisions you've made where you've requested to remove certain parts, but also there are a couple of parts where you talked about wanting to include, like particularly the line around transparency. I really appreciate that actually. Just bearing in mind some of the struggles that your roundtable has had around requests for county data and all of that. And so I definitely see room for improvement in being able to incorporate that one way or another. So my sense is that like, this is good, it could be better, and let's give ourselves the space we need to make it better.
Well,
My
yeah.
question is, do we need to vote or do we defer?
So I'm going to say let's defer with this caveat that it reflect that your observations reflect what we actually heard and the sentiments that we got from my community. This document is when we were charged to go out and hear from our community, and that's what you have here. I can see ways that it can be better, and if you would like to take that time, I think we should do that. So thank you for this discussion. We do have to move on. None of this is easy. I understand and affirm your sentiment, Jesse, not to see this move forward in a divided manner as well. So we'll do what we can. One thing that we all know that Jesse does very well is collaborate, to Marsha's point. So in his wordsmithing, you will hear from him again. So please honor his, if he sends out a request, and let's honor that time and make sure that we kind of come back having really thought through this as we do, as we look at this again next month. Thank you. Let's move on to our next one, please. From our
Xavier, sorry, I think you answered my question. So we're looking forward to a third and final reading and hopefully approval of this proposal at the September meeting. We don't have to wait for this to be part of the SRO roundtable final report package, correct?
That's correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, crisis response roundtable, ensuring city and county employee preparedness to respond to overdose emergencies and ready access to emergency naloxone kits. I know I'm mispronouncing that. I'm just going to stop trying.
Thanks, folks. So last meeting, our roundtable offered two proposals. One of those we are making some minor edits to and are still reaching out to some folks and hope to have it to you ahead of time for a second reading at our next meeting. One we are bringing to you again for a second reading today, unchanged from when we read it last month. So in brief, we are proposing a large sort of harm reduction framework for the city and county that you're going to be hearing about that again next month. And today I'm coming back to you with our naloxone proposal. So this is a proposal that was inspired by our task force leadership. It aligns with our goals in a number of different ways. Let me pop it up on. May I please be a co-host so that I can share my screen? But we are, in short, the goal of this is twofold. One, thank you so very, very much. All right, here we go. So the goal, I'm going to scroll down to the goals real quick just to remind everybody. Is here to ensure that all City of Durham and Durham County employees are empowered with the knowledge and tools to respond to a suspected opioid overdose event encountered while on the job. So we're operationalizing that in a couple of ways. I'm going to scroll up to the activities. The summary is this. So we're proposing essentially three things. One, that all City of Durham and Durham County employees receive training to identify opioid overdose and respond to an opioid overdose emergency by administering the opioid reversal medication naloxone. Two, ensuring that all City of Durham and Durham County employees have immediate access to a naloxone rescue kit whenever and wherever they are on the job. And then three, integrating overdose identification and response training into all new employee orientation events and take any additional steps to ensure that new employees also have immediate access to a naloxone rescue kit whenever and wherever they are on the job if needed. So we're recommending that this be implemented in two ways. The training we are proposing being carried out by the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition. They are the statewide experts in this particular area. They have been offering naloxone trainings, not just in the city and county of Durham broadly, but even within our correctional system for free for a very, very long time. We are proposing, and NCHRC is very, very enthusiastic about the possibility of providing a series of rolling trainings over the next 12 months, 14 months, however it can be reasonably implemented. We're leaving some of this open-ended because it's really going to come down to like department managers and folks like that to decide what's really feasible. And then also to have NCHRC do that training, and then NCHRC integrate them very, very briefly into the ongoing new employee trainings for the city and the county, both of which happen twice a month. Speaking from personal experience, I've been training folks to identify overdose and use naloxone for years. I've been through Train the Trainer in both Washington and Rhode Island. It is possible to fill out these trainings and have just like massively educational, really robust stuff and take hours. It's also very, very possible to very quickly, very effectively teach someone to use this in 5 minutes. All right, it's just not that complicated. So it can be as rich or as speedy as we need it to be. And we're proposing like a 20 to 30 minutes. I know that training for folks who've gone through it, that new employee orientation is already tight, but that's what we're proposing, is fitting it in there about 20 minutes. In addition to that, we are proposing that the city and the county procure naloxone. We are not dictating precisely how they are going to do that, but we have laid out the significant difference in price between, come down here, here we go. Significant difference in price between the injectable naloxone and the, here we go, and the nasal naloxone. Nasal naloxone is the one that's most commonly found in most municipal settings genuinely for no reason other than the fact that there is often sometimes concern about having injectable medication on site, and because the people who make brand name nasal Narcan are just really excellent marketers, but they're still charging about $50 per kit, whereas the injectable stuff can be bought through the Remedy Alliance for $375. So it's almost a tenfold difference. We're also not recommending that every single county and city employee receive a naloxone kit to carry around. We talk up at the top very specifically about AED standards. So we're recommending to use something approximating the American Heart Association's standards for AEDs. They recommend stationing automatic external defibrillators in locations that allow a maximum 3-minute walk time. So that means like a minute and a half walking briskly from where you are to get the defibrillator, and then a minute and a half walking back from anywhere in the facility. A really easy way to do that is to put naloxone rescue kits into or next to existing AEDs that are everywhere for people, especially that are in the building. There are some folks, it's already common practice to ensure that squad cars, for example, have naloxone. So if there's 2 officers driving together, they do not both need a naloxone kit, they need one. And then there's other fleets of folks that go out that do sanitation work, waste collection, things like that. We're really deferring to, like I said, team leaders, department heads, city managers to figure out exactly where and how that can be covered. But that is the I think the brief overview of this recommendation. It was attached to email. I'm happy to answer any additional questions, but since this is our second read, I will stop there. And just remind folks that this is unchanged from last month because we did not receive and did not receive any sort of new impetus for editing the text as it was. I'm not seeing any hands. Are folks feeling satisfied? Oh, something popped up in the chat. Mhm.
Seem to be no questions.
So one thing, someone messaged me to note that naloxone spray is readily available at the health department for free. That is true. The health department is currently purchasing nasal Narcan from Bioemergent Solutions for $45 per box. And they are able to continue. I mean, that is one way to do it. It is possible for the health department to continue working through that Bioemergent Solutions contract and obtain naloxone to ensure that city and county employees are covered. It's going to cost, I think the professional term is an absolute crap ton to do that, because in my personal opinion, Bioemergent Solutions is not a good actor in this regard. We've had really excellent analysis from colleagues at UNC Chapel Hill that indicate that, excuse me, upwards of 80% of the price of that product is profit alone, and that it only costs a couple of dollars to manufacture. So we're really strongly recommending that the city goes and the county go a different route for obtaining that. But that is an absolutely available option. And if they chose to do that, that would certainly meet all of the parameters of this recommendation. And we certainly have a hefty chunk of opioid settlement money to spend on that if we want to.
Yeah, I was going to email that question, Jennifer. You anticipated it. Clearly, there is a pot of money that's intended for exactly this sort of thing. So, and well timed, right? The sooner this proposal gets in front of them being the city and the county, the sooner that money will get diverted or spent on other less useful approaches.
Well, I mean, I think it's also important to keep in mind that we did the math on this, and for example, if we were to give every single employee, we're not recommending this, right? But if we were to give every single employee a unique nasal naloxone kit, that would basically run our entire opioid settlement payment dry. That is not a good use of the opioid settlement monies. The people who are most in need of this medication are other people who use drugs because they are the most likely to witness an overdose. But we also need to do, I think, an awful lot to normalize the presence of this. We know from experience, as part of the inspiration behind this proposal, that we have city employees who encounter this on a regular basis, not just Hart, but other folks. And we currently don't have, for example, naloxone in our schools, in our libraries, places where people do encounter drugs, do intend to use drugs. And so having these things, I think, more available is provided that we are able to keep the price reasonable, which is very, very, very much within the realm of possibility. If we purchase reasonable products, I think is a very good use of it. Dr. Boone, you had a hand up?
I also just want to do a quick time check on the remaining comments. We have about 8 minutes left in the meeting, and we do have one more recommendation to get to. So if people can keep their comments brief, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Rose.
I think Muffin's hand was up first.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see. Please, Muffin.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Boone. I just had a question around if the, is there a way to have the, I can't pronounce it, but to have it like in corner stores or where folks generally gather, have it like in one of those like break in case of emergency type things where it wouldn't be as expensive to keep, does it keep in the weather? You know, things like that is what I'm curious of.
Yeah, so the reason why that we recommended it within city and county employees is because that's something that the city and county have direct control over. There is a sort of term of art for what you're talking about, having it around the community. They've kind of become called Nalox boxes. Those are like break in case of emergency. Those are, that's both the name of like a product that you can purchase that has actual glass that you can actually break in emergency. And it's just also sort of like a name for, you know, you could have like a lunchbox tacked to the wall or whatever people choose to do. The North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition is already has been doing community distribution of naloxone for a very, very long time. The degree that it exists in bars, pawn shops, community centers, things like that is largely their doing. And should any group or individual want to obtain something to keep like in their business, in their church, in their drop-in center, wherever, they can go to the public health department to obtain it for free. They can go to the Remedy Alliance to obtain it probably for free, and they can go to North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition also to probably obtain it for free. And it's also currently available at over-the-counter, well, it's a whole other policy conversation, but it is the nasal stuff is over the counter now, and anyone can walk into any pharmacy and request it. If you are not insured, it can sometimes cost upwards of $80 because it's the nasal that's often available, and that's why NCHRC does so much community distribution of the injectable. So I think I'm not trying to talk around your question. If I understood your question correctly, the reason why the broader community scope wasn't included in here is because that's kind of up. We perceive that at least as up to each individual sort of entity and group, and at least within the city and county administrative domains, we can get it covered. Did I miss any part of your question in that, Muffin?
No, you didn't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that we're working on the community side of this, and we are distributing Narcan naloxone spray in Durham public housing and to other community members because it needs to get out there. Durham public schools, middle and high schools do carry naloxone. The sheriff's department is carrying naloxone. And this doesn't have anything to do with the wide scope, but I just want to make sure that these things are known based on the conversation. The police department didn't carry naloxone for quite some time, and now they do. Mm-hmm. There are other areas where this is out there. So I just wanted to make that point. And we do provide training to the community. So Muffin, we can get together offline about that.
Okay.
Thanks for all these important questions. I do want to make sure we get to the vote here, but also would ask grace of everyone here beyond the 7:30 time, if we could at least extend 10 minutes of grace to our violence prevention group because they have a first reading. And of course we have hard deadlines to meet. So prior to doing this vote and prior to, let's do this vote first. Then I have another request from you before we hear from violence prevention. So if we are ready to take a vote on this recommendation, I'd like to move forward with that. Thank you. Isaac,
Yes.
thank you. Jennifer,
Yes.
thank you. Jesse,
Yes.
thank you. Manju,
Yes.
thank you. Marcia,
Yes.
thank you. Mike,
Yes.
thank you. Muffin,
Yes.
thank you. Samuel,
Yes.
thank you. Shanice,
Yes.
thank you. Wanda,
Yes.
thank you. And I vote yes as well. It passes unanimously. While we're still within the official 90-minute time, I would ask for you to consider for about 20 seconds, and then by raising of the raised hand, using the raised hand feature, if we could, or raise your actual hand, if we could agree to extend our September meeting, which is our last meeting to consider recommendations, to a 2-hour meeting as opposed to a 90-minute meeting. If I can get you to raise your hands to agree that we make that crucial penultimate meeting a 90-minute meeting. So by simple majority, we have agreement. So thank you for that. Samuel, Dr. Boone, thank you so much for your patience.
Absolutely. Do I have sharing privileges? Let me see.
I'll give them to you. 1 sec.
All right, cool beans. Thank you. All right, I should have them now. Yep, I do have them. Yeah, so this is the youth consent proposal. Shouldn't take too long, in all honesty. There's still a lot of important stakeholders that I need to reach out to. And even, this document right here, even though it was sent out yesterday, there's some things that changed within the time frame of yesterday to today. So I want to kind of cover those things, but before that, just a simple submitted by from our roundtable. And then the non-task force members are 3 other interested youth that have been integral in this work, organizing different meetings, kind of planning the overall outline of this proposal. In terms of the agencies and organizations, you can see those there. Some of those have been reached out to, some of those haven't. And some of those I'm actually going to take down because they're not even crucial to the actual execution of this. Kind of going into the general gist of what this proposal is. The basic idea is to provide DPS students, specifically high school age students, with access to sexual consent education, just because I think it is very important in terms of the overall mission of our roundtable, which is violence prevention. And in this case, it's preventing sexual violence. There are numerous studies that have found that very few people have actually, received education on consent, and also that receiving consent education is actually very effective at mitigating people from ever having to deal with sexual violence. Because the whole idea of sexual consent education is to provide the people that are trained with the skills and knowledge to preserve their sexual autonomy and to protect their sexual autonomy. And so that's kind of the major goal of these workshops, is to make sure that our young people in Durham, especially DPS students, as it pertains to this proposal, have access to that information. So this is just kind of the general summary. It goes over the 3 major goals, which is improving sexual literacy, providing youth with the tools and resources to protect their sexual autonomy, and then decreasing, honestly, just decreasing sexual assault. The general structure of this would be allowing high school students during a health or PE class block in a gender neutral setting to have access to these programs directly in the schools. Field professionals from Planned Parenthood, which is the organization I've currently talked to about this, would help facilitate these consent workshops, but it's still tentative. And I think Marcia actually sent another resource that could also provide these services. Still waiting to reach out, waiting for a response from them. But whether it's Planned Parenthood or this other resource, the whole idea is to provide it directly at the schools. The curriculum that's being used kind of as the sample curriculum in this proposal was developed between Planned Parenthood and student leaders at NCSSM, which was my former school, but I also went to Hillside. I still claim Hillside. But the general gist of this was it was a pilot program that was launched because of a lot of student concerns around sexual assault at NCSSM. And a lot of the students that were involved in the program found it very informative and very insightful. And so I just thought that model could be adapted and applied to DPS schools. And then the final aspect of that is just making sure that the materials are, accessed in an equitable lens. So making sure that we're taking into account language justice and disability justice. And then in terms of how this proposal aligns with task force bylaws and also DPS strategic plan, I've kind of taken a few quotes out. And then kind of the last major aspect is the experts consulted. Some of these people I've met with, some of these people I'm meeting with soon. As it says up there, it says consulting soon with Giovanni Lewis. I met with board member Lewis yesterday. So that's kind of changed. She provides some very good feedback that I can apply for my future meetings with some of these other people regarding like the implementation of this, the structure of this. And then in terms of the public input piece, that's just the part that hasn't happened yet. I've been told that there are a lot of students from Jordan High School specifically that organized around this, and I'm trying to reach out to them. So if you know any Jordan High School students that went to the school board directly regarding sexual assault concerns, please let me know, because that would be very important to kind of providing that public input piece for this, considering that Jordan High School was one of the overrepresented schools for the sheriff call data that's listed up somewhere in the proposal. It should be up there somewhere. They're one of the schools that had the most sexual assault dispatches, according to that data. And then the final proposal details is this idea of expansion. So hopefully, if this proposal is successful, we can also think about ways of expanding this program to other parts of Durham that are not DPS. So we're thinking about the private schools, charter schools, and also justice involved youth in the Durham Youth Home. Those are just different areas where we could engage in this issue and make sure those youth have, access to this information. And then the final thing is mainly just important definitions that kind of are related to the topics of consent education and honestly sex ed in general, which needs a lot of work, especially from state definitions and stuff like that. But that's basically it. The budget stuff, that will get kind of sorted out by the next meeting. And we can look into perhaps doing an emergency meeting after that if there are concerns with the budget. But that's basically it. I hope I went over that stuff very quickly. But yeah, I'm cool to accept any questions right now.
Mac, you put something in the comments. You want to speak to that for those who are not?
I was just saying to Sam that I admire his gumption on this, but I wouldn't worry about getting too much into the weeds of implementation and budget and whatnot. I think this is a kind of an aspirational proposal, as many of ours are at this stage. Can leave it up to DPS to figure out how to implement it. And there'll be plenty of devilish details in that, especially if you're talking about consent and sex ed, But I don't
Absolutely.
think I don't think you should try to figure all those out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Because they would even say, well, don't tell us how to spend our money. Don't tell us who to, we've heard that
Yep.
before. So you don't even need to get into that. Just say, this is a good idea. Figure it out.
Appreciate that.
Totally agree with that assessment, as well as I appreciate the fact that you're going to the district and getting, getting consultation from them, as they will be very much involved in the implementation. Just kind of get their feedback on it. So I think that's really the right move, which, as far as the public input, the time factor is not on your side, obviously, but getting input from those who would implement it is at this point very crucial. So thank you for doing that work and continuing to keep that going.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Any other comments for Sam? If not, thank you all for your grace. We'll turn it over to Marcia for our closing.
So we don't need to do a vote as a first reading or any of that stuff. No. Okay, just checking. I'm already confused. Well, as we end this meeting, it's been wonderful. Always good to be with you all. So as we close this time together, if you'd like to put in the chat what you're leaving with as we go forth from this, and I'll read it out. If you would share love, I'll put belonging.
Marcia, can I put in a brief PSA while
Yes.
people are typing? And that is, since we're all starting to work on final proposals and final reports, something that's come up in the criminal legal system roundtable is the need for language access that is all over the criminal legal system. And I'm assuming that's something that you all are encountering in aspects of school safety and crisis response. So if you're able to highlight that in your final report, that allows Rose and myself and whoever else is helping to put together the overarching task force final report to highlight those kind of issues that cut across all roundtables. And that's one, mental health is one, youth is another one. So just kind of, be mindful of those. Even if you don't have a specific proposal and lots of detail, that's the kind of thing we can try to highlight for, at the very front before readers ever get to the specific roundtable summaries, which will then echo those common themes that cut across.
Right. And I would like, Samuel, I think one of the most beautiful things about this proposal is the language justice for everyone. Just really, all of our recommendations should reflect that. You just did a beautiful, comprehensive job with that. So as we're leaving, shared responsibility, endurance, ooh, boy, great expectations, love it. Care for each other, patience for process, deep gratitude, persistence, appreciation, inspiration, fast writing. You all are just fantastic. It's such an honor to serve Durham and on this task force with you all. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you for a nice long meeting on September 13th.